When white opens the game with the active and direct e4, black's most classical response is to fight for an equal share of the center with e5. White typically attacks black's central stronghold with knight f3. When black develops a piece and defends the center with knight c6. White's most popular responses include bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez, and bishop c4, the Italian game. These classical lines are not without potential attacking chances, but they often involve positional maneuvering that gradually builds the tension in the position, including playing c3 to later prepare to fight for greater central control with d4. We're going to focus on a more direct approach by striking in the center immediately with d4. This turns the game into the dynamic Scotch opening, immediately confronting black's center and forcing open lines to support rapid development. If black does not respond actively, white can quickly build a favorable position. For example, if black passively defends the e5 pawn with d6, white has no shortage of strong responses, including d takes e5, preparing to favorably exchange queens whether black immediately plays d takes e5, or first allows a trade of knights with knight takes e5. Another strong choice is bishop b5, pinning the knight with an active position, and even grabbing space with d5, followed by c4 is certainly not out of the question. Instead of reacting passively, black should capture white's pawn with e takes d4. Although there are some alternatives including bishop c4 and c3 inviting gambit play, white's main response is the direct knight takes d4. When you first see the Scotch, some players make the mistake of trying to remove the tension by trading knights with knight takes d4, queen takes d4. Although moving your queen out too early can often lead to trouble, white is simply gaining a lead in development while enjoying greater central control. There is no favorable way to attack white's queen, as c5 restricts the dark-squared bishop and also creates a backward pawn on d7. Attempting to trade queens with queen f6 is well met by e5, gaining a tempo against the queen while grabbing more space. Rather than releasing the tension to white's benefit with knight takes d4, black's most popular responses are the natural developing moves knight f6 and bishop c5. Let's first take a look at the straightforward bishop c5, developing a piece and adding a second attacker against the knight on d4. White has several options to explore, including knight b3, releasing the tension in the center while adding pressure against the bishop on c5. A more popular choice is knight takes c6, which can create interesting complications after queen f6, temporarily ignoring the knight on c6 in order to threaten checkmate on f2, an important line the viewer is encouraged to explore. Since the Scotch can be such a sharp opening with so many dynamic lines to consider, we're going to focus on white's most popular, as well as straightforward choice, bishop e3. White supports the knight and also x-rays the dark-squared bishop, so if black isn't careful, knight takes c6, capturing a piece while attacking the enemy queen, also reveals the dark-squared bishop's pressure against its counterpart, winning a piece. One response for black is to spend another tempo and secure the dark-squared bishop. After moving the dark-squared bishop for a second time, white can respond with knight c3 or bishop c4, which are both natural and reasonable options. And another way to challenge black's position is to play knight f5, pouncing on the unprotected g7 pawn while also revealing tension between the dark-squared bishops. White's idea is to meet g6, weakening black's kingside in the process, with bishop takes b6, continuing to compromise black's structure. We can also see a typical plan employed by white after the exchange as bishop takes e3. Knight takes e3. White's knight helps control the d5 square, making it difficult for black to achieve the favorable d5 pawn break. In response to the sensible knight f6, developing a piece and adding pressure against white's center, white can play knight c3, supporting the e4 pawn while also helping control the d5 square. Black can take the opportunity to secure the king by castling, when white can play the instructive idea, queen d2. White's idea is to castle queenside and prepare a kingside pawn storm with f3 and g4. We can see this plan in action after rook e8, intensifying the pressure against e4 when white can calmly respond with f3, reinforcing the center while later preparing kingside expansion with g4. Black can support the center and prepare to develop the light-squared bishop with d6, when white continues the plan by castling queenside. This leads to sharp positions in which white prepares g4, possibly dislodging the key defender of the kingside with a future g5. Of course, black will want to fight back with a queenside pawn storm with a6 and b5, a sensible plan, but white is leading the pawn storm race with a dangerous initiative. Bishop b6 is certainly a playable option, but if black is inspired to fight fire with fire, then a more active approach is the popular queen f6, intensifying the pressure against the knight on d4 as well as the f2 pawn. The queen also reinforces the g7 pawn, making knight f5 less desirable, especially as black can simply capture the b2 pawn. Moving the queen to f6 does leave the c7 pawn unprotected, so if white wants to unleash incredible complications, a move worth exploring is knight b5, threatening a fork on c7 while also revealing tension between the dark-squared bishops. Black's position is put to the test, but with active play, black should not fear these complications, starting with bishop takes e3, threatening checkmate on f2, so after f takes e3, it's important for black to insert the disruptive check, queen h4, provoking the weakening g3. Black can play the dynamic queen takes e4, leading to sharp complications after knight takes c7 check, or else play the more solid queen d8, supporting the c7 pawn after damaging white's pawn structure. This situation looks like a positional nightmare for white, especially with doubled isolated e-pawns, but in addition to supporting the center, these doubled pawns suggest the d and f files are open for white's rooks to create active piece play. Black's pawn structure is in good shape for the time being, but white can provoke some weaknesses with the dynamic queen g4, attacking black's unprotected g7 pawn and preparing kingside pressure. Black can avoid weakening the pawn structure by forfeiting the right to castle with king f8, not as bad of a move as it may appear. g6 is a natural option to consider, but if black wants to play more ambitiously, then g5, fighting for kingside space, sets the stage for a sharp struggle. Instead of playing the chaotic knight b5, white can decide to play more solidly with c3, supporting the centralized knight at the expense of depriving the queenside knight of its most natural developing square, c3. The knight on g8 can definitely relate to restricted squares, since the active queen on f6 deprives the kingside knight of its most active developing square. Black typically plays knight g to e7. This move defends the other knight, prepares kingside castling, and also supports the important central pawn break, d5. If white plays a cautious developing move such as bishop e2, this is well met by d5, attacking white's center while also opening up a path for the light-squared bishop. This is why white may prefer to play the more active bishop c4, pointing directly at black's kingside and also fighting for control over the d5 square. One solid move for black is to castle the king. Notice that knight takes c6, capturing a piece while revealing the dark-squared bishop's pressure against its counterpart on c5, is well met by queen takes c6, regaining material while supporting the bishop on c5. White takes a moment to secure the king by castling. When black has an important decision to make, a natural-looking choice is d6, securing the dark-squared bishop while also opening up a path for the light-squared bishop to enter the game. One drawback to this move is black's queen no longer supports the knight on c6, so this allows knight takes c6, knight takes c6, allowing white to compromise black's structure with bishop takes c5, d takes c5, doubling black's c-pawns when a strong continuation is f4, grabbing more central and kingside space when white enjoys the more active game. Instead of playing d6, another pawn move, b6, has gained some grandmaster attention, supporting the dark-squared bishop while preparing to fianchetto the light-squared bishop. This is definitely an interesting line worth exploring. Another solid option is bishop b6, which allows black to prepare the natural d6 without worrying about seriously weakening the queenside, since knight d2 would block the queen's defense of the knight on d4. White's queenside knight usually enters the game with knight a3. Although this knight move may appear passive, it can enter the action quickly with the maneuver bishop b3, followed by knight c4. Black can decide to respond with the solid d6, supporting the center while preparing to develop the light-squared bishop. In addition to bishop b3, intending knight c4, white may also complete development with queen d2, preparing to centralize the rook with rook a to e1, followed by grabbing more space on the king side with a properly timed f4. Black may decide to support the knight with bishop d7, connecting the rooks. Depending on black's ambitions, it's not out of the question to explore knight e5, attacking the light-squared bishop, opening up the c6 square for the other knight, and possibly considering the disruptive knight g4, attacking the dark-squared bishop and adding pressure against white's kingside. And if allowed, black will stay on the alert to play a timely d5 central pawn break. There's no shortage of creative play available, offering plenty of chances for both sides. Bishop c5 is a reliable choice for black. Another mainline option is the sensible knight f6, immediately adding pressure against white's center. If white defends the pawn with knight c3, this transposes into the 4-knight Scotch, a solid opening worth exploring. To get started, you may consider black's popular and active response bishop b4, pinning the knight. White's most popular and active response, however, is to double black's pawns with knight takes c6. Since d takes c6 allows white to trade queens and eliminate black's ability to castle, black responds with b takes c6. We have reached the Mises variation of the Scotch. Supporting the center with bishop d3 is definitely worth exploring, although black can strike in the center with the disruptive d5, placing white's center under pressure. This creates dynamic positions in which black shouldn't face any serious problems out of the opening with proper play. In order to prevent black from energetically striking in the center, white can play the double-edged e5, grabbing space and trying to gain a tempo against the knight. Against e5 if black reacts to the pressure with knight d5. White can gain another tempo against the knight with c4, knight b6. The key point to emphasize is that in this variation, white is able to activate the light-squared bishop with bishop d3. White enjoys a space advantage, superior pawn structure, as well as active development, so this is not black's most attractive option. Instead of reacting by moving the knight, black's most common move is the strange-looking, but effective queen e7. Moving your queen out too early is generally not a good idea, but black pins the e5 pawn to the enemy king. In order for white to properly defend this pawn, white will also have to make an awkward-looking queen move, queen e2. By provoking these queen moves, both sides have blocked their kingside bishops, so unlike the previous example, white will not enjoy such straightforward and comfortable development. Now that the e5 pawn is no longer pinned, black moves the knight to safety with knight d5, allowing white to attack the knight again with c4. We reach an important crossroads. One choice for black is to play knight b6, removing the tension against the knight, and possibly preparing queenside castling after developing the light-squared bishop. Another idea for black is to expand on the queen side with a5 and a4. This plan may prove especially effective if white decides to play a queenside fianchetto. Knight b6 is a popular option with a wealth of opening theory to explore, but black can also decide to maintain the tension in the center with bishop a6, pinning the c4 pawn to the queen. Reinforcing the c4 pawn is a good idea for white. This can be achieved by knight d2, an interesting line worth exploring, especially for Scotch players who are less interested in allowing simplifications. The traditional way to support c4 has been b3, opening up the c1 to a3 diagonal for white's bishop. This move often prepares a queenside fianchetto, supporting white's center and pointing toward black's kingside. If black wants to create more imbalances in the position, then queenside castling is an interesting option to explore. Another path is to figure out how to activate the dark-squared bishop. A good plan is to play g6, preparing to play bishop g7, increasing the tension against white's e5 pawn and also creating the option of kingside castling. If white tries to disrupt black's plans with bishop a3, attacking the queen and preparing a favorable exchange of dark-squared bishops, this may look annoying for black, but it's well met by knight b4. Deliberately pinning your own knight is generally not a good idea, but this turns out to be a solid option, and in fact, white should return to the idea of playing bishop b2, because if white plays a move such as g3, preparing to complete development with bishop g2, followed by kingside castling, although bishop g7 is a reasonable option, black can surprise white with the disruptive knight c2 check, forking the king and rook, as well as attacking the dark-squared bishop. This highlights some of the potential drawbacks to white's aggressive setup if white plays without proper care. The advanced e5 pawn disrupted black's development, but it is also vulnerable to attack. After queen takes c2, black can take advantage of the space the queen left behind with queen takes e5 check, attacking white's king and rook on a1, taking advantage of the weakened long dark-squared diagonal. In order to avoid losing the rook, white can play queen e2, pinning the black queen to the king. White is prepared to respond to queen takes e2 check with king takes e2. Centralizing the king after the queens have vanished from the board is not such a bad idea, especially because white is ready to meet bishop g7, attacking the rook on a1, with knight c3. The point behind white's strange-looking king move is revealed after bishop takes c3. With the king no longer on e1, this capture does not come with check, so white is able to save the rook and centralize it with rook d1. In response to rook d1, black can decide to castle the king while supporting the d-file with queenside castling. Black is up a pawn, although white does enjoy a superior structure. Black is ready to strike in the center with the thematic d5, when black enjoys a favorable position after this instructive tactical skirmish. Since bishop a3 is not as strong as it appears, white should explore other options. One common choice is to play f4, supporting the e5 pawn, although this is well met by d6, intensifying the pressure against e5 with comfortable play. White sometimes plays bishop b2 immediately, often transposing to the lines we're about to examine, but many grandmasters decide to first play g3, preparing a kingside fianchetto and eliminating the possibility of a future knight f4. Black continues with the plan of bishop g7, attacking the e5 pawn, which white supports with bishop b2. Queenside castling remains a creative option to explore in this position, but black's most popular response is to castle kingside. White continues with bishop g2. When Grandmaster Bassem Amin demonstrated a popular plan for black, rook a to e8, intensifying pressure against the center. In order to complete development, white offers black the e5 pawn by castling. We now see black's idea. Grandmaster Amin eliminates the cramping e5 pawn, which simplifies the position into an unbalanced endgame after the exchange as bishop takes e5. Queen takes e5, queen takes e5, bishop takes e5, and rook takes e5. The c4 pawn is no longer pinned to white's queen, so white offers the rook on f1 for two minor pieces with c takes d5. Bishop takes f1. White does not want to make the bishop on g2 passive, so Grandmaster Levon Aronian played king takes f1. Black picks up another pawn with c takes d5, when white activated the knight with knight c3, intensifying the pressure against the d5 pawn. Since d4 opens up the long diagonal for white's light-squared bishop, black decided to reinforce the d5 pawn with c6. We have reached a popular endgame position in which white has exchanged a rook and two pawns for two minor pieces. This position is considered roughly balanced, but there is plenty of scope for the more experienced and likely stronger player to outplay their opponent. White may consider moves such as bishop f3, preventing black's rook from invading the second rank with the future rook e2. The move bishop f3 also supports the possible knight maneuver knight e2 to f4. White can also decide to play rook d1, intending to attack the isolated pawn on a7 after rook d4 and rook a4, as was tried in the game. Grandmaster Amin doubled rooks with rook f to e8, opening up the possibility for the creative plan to send the king to the queen side starting with king f8, using the d6 square in order to reach c7. From the c7 square, black is able to support the center, as well as the isolated pawn on a7 if necessary. White was unable to make any progress against this plan, and black was able to draw the game without any serious problems. Scotch players are often used to controlling the early events of the game, but one exception is the adventurous, but ultimately dubious Steinitz defense with queen h4, immediately putting white's center and kingside under pressure. It's important for white to stay calm, and with proper play, white can reveal some drawbacks to black's aggressive approach. A solid response is the sensible knight c3, allowing black to increase the pressure against white's center with bishop b4, pinning the knight and renewing the threat of queen takes e4 check. This is a critical moment in the opening, as white can play a move such as queen d3, which does defend the center, but it's an awkward move white should prefer to avoid. A strong response is to offer a pawn sacrifice with bishop e2. This modest move allows white to castle and focus on organic development, which if allowed, will seriously question the purpose of black's misplaced queen. After black accepts the pawn sacrifice with queen takes e4, black's early queen excursion has left the c7 pawn vulnerable to attack, so white can respond with the active knight b5, threatening a fork on c7. The greedy queen takes g2 is well met by bishop f3, attacking the queen and x-ray defending the rook on h1. White is prepared to play the crushing knight takes c7 check, so queen takes g2 should be avoided. In response to knight b5, black's best try is to compromise white's structure with bishop takes c3 check. In order to maintain the tension against black's weakened queenside, white accepts doubled pawns with b takes c3. Since defending c7 with queen e5 fails to f4, black's king reluctantly forfeits the right to castle with king d8, allowing white to secure the kingside by castling. In exchange for a pawn and accepting a compromised structure, white enjoys a lead in development, the bishop pair, as well as an insecure enemy king on d8, important ingredients to help build a dangerous attack. Although this line is playable for black, white enjoys great practical chances against this adventurous system, especially as black must be ready to adopt a defensive mindset to hold the position together. The Scotch is a dynamic opening, provoking an immediate central confrontation on the third move. This aggressive approach usually creates a structural imbalance, quickly opening lines to prepare dynamic piece play. White enjoys a space advantage and can immediately place black's position under pressure. Facing the Scotch can be psychologically unpleasant, as black needs to respond energetically, and at times must be well prepared to face a series of forcing lines that do not always favor natural-looking responses. That being said, by opening the position so quickly, black also has the ability to enjoy active play with a variety of creative piece setups available to challenge white. The Scotch can lead to lively play with plenty of chances for both sides, so best of luck on whichever side you may choose in this double-edged opening.